The knock came just after noon, when the lake was still under the pale winter sky, and the birches stood like thin sentinels at the yard's edge. When I opened the door, my father was standing there, his stance upright, almost proud, as though he carried good news. But his hands, those same hands once hardened from hauling traps out of Penobscot, they trembled faintly as he slipped an envelope from his coat. He set it on my kitchen table like a prize he was eager to unveil. A cashier's check slid free $12,000 in neat, cold type. "There," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. "Enough to start over? You could find a place in Portland, maybe Boston. The cottage is spoken for now. 3 million cash." It was the smart thing to do. I didn't look at him. My gaze stayed fixed on the check, while my fingers rested on the steel key I wore around my neck. His cologne, sharp and out of place in the quiet kitchen, filled the air. "You sold the cottage," I said evenly. "You've been too busy to manage it," he replied, voice coated in false reason. "You're drowning in work, running jobs up and down the coast. This way, you're free. I saved you." I let him keep talking, his confidence swelling in the silence I gave him. He spoke of investments, eager buyers, and how generous he was to leave me anything at all. What he didn't know, what he could not imagine, was that 3 days earlier I'd sat in Claire Nagin's office in Rockland, signing the papers that placed the cottage into an irrevocable trust. What he didn't know was that a fraud alert already waited at the Registry of Deeds, a silent tripwire. I lifted the check once, turned it between my fingers, then set it back down. He leaned back satisfied. But when I stood and moved to the window, watching the lake stretch out in silence, I smiled. That was the moment he should have realized the story wasn't his to write anymore. After he left, the cottage seemed to breathe with memory. I thought of the winter since my mother's death, the weight of the inheritance I hadn't asked for. The cottage had fallen into disrepair back then, roof shingles curling, floors sinking with water damage. I was 24, old enough to feel loss, too young to know how permanent it was. Still, I stayed. I worked by day in Camden, and by night I stripped wallpaper, sanded floors, rebuilt joists. Each repaired beam felt like a conversation with my mother words I couldn't afford to let vanish. Meanwhile, my father's voice was a constant echo on the phone, always needing something. Bridge loans, truck repairs, late mortgage payments on a house he swore he'd flip. Too often I said yes. I told myself it was family duty, that if I held the purse strings, I could prevent his ruin. But control comes with a cost. Silence. I never asked where the money truly went. I just kept giving until my own life narrowed into a cage. The cottage was the only place that never betrayed me. Each winter I lit the stove and watched the snow pile against the stone steps, proof that I could endure. But endurance is not the same as freedom. The whisper of freedom came from Owen. His call was late, voice uneasy, as though he wished the words could stay unspoken. He'd overheard my father in a Rockport bar, bragging about how the lake place would be gone within the week. He laughed, telling the table I was naive enough to sign anything he put in front of me. That laughter, even secondhand, cut me deeper than any blade. The next morning, I was in Claire's office. Calm, precise, she told me what I already feared. A forged power of attorney was in motion. If we didn't act, my father's deal could be filed before I even knew. Together we built a defense, an irrevocable trust, a fraud alert affidavit, layers of protection he could never see coming. I left her office with a new certainty in my chest. This time he would not cross me. Back at the cottage, preparation became ritual. I installed hidden cameras above doorways and rafters, each red light blinking quietly for me alone. Claire connected me with a handwriting expert in Portland, who confirmed what I already sensed. The forgeries were clumsy imitations. No one can mimic intimacy with ink, The trail of money led us further to one of his old poker companions, a man from Warren. Small deposits, sudden withdrawals. It was less a business deal than a shell game. An already collapsing Dot. Then came the call from Martelaire at the registry. Suspicious documents had been dropped after hours. Rushed, sloppy, ready to be caught in a net we'd woven. Her steady voice carried the kind of loyalty no money could buy. Through it all, Owen offered help. I told him no. I needed control, even if it meant loneliness. My father had trained me to trust no one. So when he finally called, inviting me to dinner at the Summit Grill on the Rockland waterfront, I was ready. The stage was set. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already waiting. A bottle of wine chilling in its bucket, menu spread out like props on a stage. His grin was wide, rehearsed, the kind of smile he wore when he believed the world was finally bending to his will. "Sit down, Sable," he said, voice ringing with cheer. "Tonight is a night for goodbyes, but also for beginnings. You'll see." I lowered myself into the chair, folding the napkin across my lap with deliberate calm, hiding the tremor in my hands. He poured 2 glasses of wine and lifted his in a toast. "To your freedom," he declared. "No more dragging that place like an anchor. I've lifted the weight from your shoulders." I let my glass touch his, though I didn't drink. He leaned back, smugness flickering in his eyes. "You should be thanking me. 3 million isn't a bad price. 12,000 in your pocket. That's my way of making sure you land on your feet." The words slid over me like ice water. He wanted gratitude for erasing me. Instead, I smiled faintly, a mask he mistook for surrender. Halfway through the meal, Claire entered. She feigned surprise when her gaze landed on me. "Mind if I join you?" she asked lightly. My father's brows arched, but he waved her toward the empty chair. He still thought he held every card. The waiter cleared our plates. Wine loosened his tongue, and his voice dipped into bitterness. "You know, Sable, your mother always favored you, even in her will. That house should have been mine. I built the dock, fixed the roof, paid the taxes. And what did the judge do? Handed it to you like I was nothing." I studied him carefully. Beneath the bravado lay the wound that had festered for years. It wasn't just about money, it was about erasing the scar my mother's choice had carved into him. Claire caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. The mask was slipping as the next round of wine arrived. Claire leaned forward, her tone casual but edged with steel. "Ronan, I stopped by the registry this week. Some interesting documents turned up under your name." His fork froze mid-air. "What documents?" Claire pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of the trust filings, stamped and dated days before. "The cottage isn't vulnerable to your signatures anymore. It belongs to an irrevocable trust. Sable is the lifetime beneficiary. Any deed filed afterward is void." His face darkened. He flipped through the pages as though disbelief could undo the ink. "You can't do this to me. I already had a buyer." Claire's voice remained steady. "That buyer's funds trace back to a shell account tied to one of your poker friends in Warren. The money never cleared escrow. Representing otherwise is fraud." He slammed the folder shut, anger cracking through his composure. "I poured years into that place. Paid bills when your mother couldn't. She owes me." The words burned, but I kept my tone cold. "I don't owe you theft." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Desperate. You don't understand. I'm drowning. Thomas and Linders are after me. I can't walk the harbor without someone breathing down my neck. Selling that house was my way to stay afloat." Claire's gaze hardened. "And forging your daughter's signature? That's fraud, exploitation, and theft by deception. The district attorney could press charges tomorrow." For the first time, the swagger drained out of him. He glanced toward the window where the lighthouse blinked against the dark horizon. Then he straightened, trying for one last defense. So what now? You drag me off in handcuffs? Not yet, Claire said quietly. If you cooperate, if you repay, if you stop interfering, it may influence how charges move forward. But make no mistake, the clock has started. Silence thickened around us. He shifted in his chair, smaller now, stripped of certainty. And I realized this dinner wasn't a farewell. It was his first hearing. His reckoning had begun. The next morning, I sat across from Claire in her office, the file spread open with yellow tabs. What outcome do you want? She asked gently. I swallowed. I don't want this buried, but I don't want him in prison if there's another way. She nodded, already drafting. Civil action first, restitution structured. He'd liquidate assets, enter counseling, sign a covenant never to touch the trust again. Any breach, and the criminal case would ignite. When I told Owen, he frowned into his coffee. You know he'll say we're destroying him. Maybe both can be true, I answered. But I can't stay silent anymore. Back at the cottage, I began resetting locks, replacing old hinges, securing doors. Each turn of the wrench was both practical and symbolic. On the mantel, I placed 2 frames side by side, my mother's yellowed deed and the new trust certificate. Proof of survival, proof of reclamation. Ronan tried again, calling Owen with pleas of loyalty. This time, Owen didn't bend. If you want to talk about money or the house, do it through Claire. That loyalty cut through me like relief that almost felt like grief. For the first time, someone else was standing on the line with me. Weeks passed. Tourists crowded Camden. The air shifted toward autumn. Ronan began restitution small payments clipped from boat repair wages, logged without fanfare. I kept every receipt. Then came a plain letter in his hand. No apologies, just a request to stand at the road and see the cottage once more. I allowed it, one visit from the gravel shoulder. He stood at a distance, silent, studying the roof lines and birches. His face unreadable, his silence the closest thing to respect I had ever received by September. I knew the truth. The future would be written in boundaries, not bargains. On the mantel, I built a shadow box. Inside it lay 3 things: the steel key I once wore, the crisp trust certificate, and a photograph of the cottage my mother had taken the summer before she died. Together, they told the story, what was nearly stolen, and what I reclaimed. Outside, the lake caught the light like polished glass. The cottage breathed with quiet resilience, and beyond the gate, my father's shadow lingered close enough to remind me, but never again allowed to cross.